The Whisper Hollow Bar was a place where people came not only for a drink, but also for oblivion. It lurked on the outskirts of Chicago, in a narrow alley that was rarely seen by casual passersby. The sign, long since tarnished by time, flashed red. I've been bartending here for 5 years. My name is Evan Harper. I'm not the kind of bartender who puts on a show with a shaker and orange zest. I just pour. I'm a good listener. And in our bar, that skill is more important than anything else. I've heard a lot of weird stories along the way. If I compiled them into one book, I'd be the envy of many writers. However, it's not about me. It's about them, the people who came here with blank stares and trembling hands. They'd sit down on a bar stool, order a whiskey or a gin and tonic. Their voices grew quieter, their eyes running to the corners, as if they were afraid someone would overhear. However, after the third drink, they would start telling me things they were afraid to tell others. Sometimes I think our bar is more than just a place to drink and relax. It's a vortex. It draws those who carry shadows into our bar. Secrets, stories that keep you up at night. And I'm the kind of person who can listen to my customers. Story 1. The Woman in White. It was pouring rain that evening. Heavy drops drummed on the roof as if invisible fingers were tapping out a mysterious message. Our bar was almost empty, just a couple of regulars resting peacefully with their glasses. I was wiping glasses and shortening the time until closing time. The door swung open with a sharp creak, letting in a gust of cold wind. A woman stood on the threshold. Not just any woman. She wasn't that kind of woman. Tall, unnaturally pale, wearing a soaked white dress that clung to her body like a second skin. Her dark hair, heavy with water, hung in wet strands, leaving dark marks on the floor. She moved silently, as if she didn't touch the floor, and sat down directly across from me. "I'll have something strong and ice-free," she said. Her voice was quiet, but somehow cold. It was as if the words passed through the ice before they left her lips. I poured. Her fingers around the glass were icy cold. "You're not from around here," I said, trying not to look her in the eye. And for good reason. When she lifted her head, I caught my breath. Her eyes were too dark, too deep, like there was an abyss behind them, ready to swallow anyone who dared to stare into them for too long. She smiled and said, "I'm just passing through here. My husband doesn't like it when I'm late." I nodded, although goosebumps were already running up and down my spine. "Do you need a cab?" She shook her head. "My husband is already waiting for me outside." I glanced involuntarily outside. Behind the fogged glass in the pitch blackness stood a figure. Tall, hunched over. He didn't move, just stood there and watched. The woman finished her glass in one gulp and stood up. "Thank you," she whispered. "I have to go." When she left our bar, the rain suddenly stopped. I went to the window. The street was empty. "Hey, Evan," Old Man Jax, one of the bar patrons, called hoarsely to me. "You okay? You're whiter than a ghost." I turned around. There were $20 left on the bar where the woman was sitting. The banknote was old, very old. It had a portrait of a president that hadn't been printed in 50 years, and on the back, barely visible, was written in blood, "I'll be coming for you soon." I my hand away sharply. What the hell is this? Suddenly there was a knock on the door, quiet, methodical. I turned my head slowly. Behind the glass, in the pitch darkness, I saw this woman's face, and in a moment, it was gone. Story 2. Halloween House. I came to work that evening in high spirits. I thought the only thing that could ruin this evening was the never-ending rain. For the third night in a row, the rain was pounding on the roof of Whisper Hollow. The bar was empty except for old Bill the trucker. In the last hour, he'd managed to empty half a bottle of bourbon. His fingers drummed nervously on the bar, and his gaze slid back to the fogged window. "Evan," he said hoarsely, "have you ever heard of the old Carver house on Highway 17? I poured myself a strong cup of coffee. After that strange woman in the wedding dress, I didn't dare to drink anymore. Abandoned, with peeling paint? There's still a for sale sign that's been hanging there since the last century?" Bill nodded grimly and continued talking. "I stopped there last fall, on Halloween." He took a big sip from his glass, and I noticed his hands shaking. "It was pouring, and my truck broke down. Its engine died, and I couldn't get it started. And near the highway, I saw this house. I thought that I could sleep in it, that at least I would have a roof over my head. When I came closer to this house, I saw that the door was open. I entered the house. Inside, it smelled musty and something foul. I turned on the flashlight. There was dust everywhere, cobwebs, and on the wall." He stopped talking. "What?" I asked. "Photographs, dozens, all photos of the same family. These photos must have been taken in the 1930s. However, every photo had been erased, the faces of everyone in the photo. I felt a chill run down my spine. With my flashlight, I illuminated the staircase that led to the second floor. At that moment behind me, a bottle fell. We both flinched. It was just me and Bill in the bar. And then we heard the sound of footsteps coming from the kitchen. Light, quick, like someone small running through the kitchen. Bill drastically finished his drink and continued his story. "I went up those stairs, and I heard a child's laughter. I shouted, 'Who's there?' However, there was only silence. I decided it was just the wind and my imagination. I went to sleep in the living room on the big, comfortable sofa. A couple or 3 hours after I fell asleep, I heard, knock, knock, knock. That knock was on the door. 3 loud knocks. I asked, 'Who's there?' Knock, 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 knock. I went over, opened the door. There was no one behind the door. Only the moon illuminated the threshold of the house with the old staircase. After I closed the door and turned around, I saw..." Immediately, I looked at Bill. His eyes became glassy. His hands began to shake, and he continued. "On every step of the stairs that led to the second floor, there was a doll, tattered. And on the topmost step, there sat a boy, or rather, what had once been a boy. Evan. He had no mouth, just eyes, huge black eyes. I immediately ran outside. I was really freaked out by what I saw. I decided to walk to my truck. On the way to my truck, I realized that I had forgotten my cap that I always wore on a trip. However, after what I saw in that house, I didn't dare to go back for it. By dawn, I reached my truck. What a surprise I was when I turned the ignition key and the engine started immediately. However, the strangest thing I saw was my cap, which I had forgotten in that house. The cap was in the cab on the passenger seat. All this happened to me a week ago, and this morning I got a letter. Bill then pulled a yellowed envelope out of his pocket and handed it to me. On it was written in scrawled handwriting, "Thank you for spending the night. You're part of the family now. We look forward to seeing you on the 31st. I stared unseeingly at the staircase in the corner of the bar that led to the back room. A moment later, a shelf rattled somewhere in the back room. Bill and I turned around. There was a doll sitting at the top of the stairs that led to the back room. Story 3. The Man in the Cauldron. At last, the rain stopped drumming on the roof of our bar. The weather had been sunny for 3 days now. It was my regular working evening. In the far corner of the bar sat an old man. His name was Walter Gray, and he came here every Friday night at 10 p.m. sharp, ordering the same drink, an old Overholt with a single ice lolly. That night, however, it was different. He sat hunched over as if trying to hide from his own shadow. His fingers were frantically clutching the glass, the ice long since melted, turning the whiskey into murky water. "Evan," he whispered, "do you believe in curses? I set aside the rag I'd been wiping the glasses with. That depends on the curse itself, Walter, I answered. He turned around sharply, looking around, as if he was afraid someone was listening. He's here again. Who is? Asked I. Walter walked over to the bar, sat down on a stool, and whispered, "The man in the bowler hat." Afterward, I poured him a fresh whiskey in a glass, although I was beginning to realize that alcohol wasn't going to help. "Tell me, what are you talking about? Who's the man in the cauldron?" I asked Walter. He closed his eyes, as if gathering his thoughts, and continued. "It all started in 1963. I was a young reporter working for the Chicago Tribune. I was sent to cover a case in an old mansion on Park Avenue. The police found the body of a woman there. She was sitting in a chair, dressed all in black, and next to her on the floor was a bowler hat, a headdress that was popular in the early 20th century. At that moment, I felt a chill run down my spine. The police thought it was suicide, but I didn't believe it. So I decided to dig a little deeper. I pulled up some old archival documents. And it turns out there have been 5 other deaths in this house in the last 30 years. They were all women. They were all dressed in black, and always with this bowler by their side. Walter brought the glass to his lips with a trembling hand. He drank the entire contents of the glass and continued. I wrote the article. And the next day, I saw him. "Who?" I asked in surprise. Walter said, "The man in the bowler hat. Tall, thin, wearing an old-fashioned coat. You couldn't see his face, just a shadow under the brim of his hat. He was standing on the other side of the street, looking at me. Afterward, Walter turned sharply toward the window. I thought it was a hallucination. However, then he started appearing everywhere. I saw him outside my house, on the subway, in the newsroom. One day I woke up in the night, and he was standing in the corner of my bedroom. I got up and turned on the light, and there was no one in the room. "What did you do?" I asked. "I burned all the case files and photographs. I thought it would help me. And he disappeared. For 30 years. "And now he's back?" I asked. Walter nodded slowly. 3 days ago. I came out of the store and he was standing across the street. The same one, tall, thin, in an old-fashioned coat, no face. And all of a sudden, Walter grabs my hand. He's not aging, Evan. He's not even human. At that moment, the bar door swung open. A cold wind blew in, blowing out the candles on the tables. There was no one on the doorstep. A cauldron remained on the floor, right by the entrance. Old, dusty, stained with what looked like blood. Walter trembled. He knows I'm here. I wanted to say something to Walter, but that's when the phone rang. The phone behind my bar counter. I picked it up. There was silence. And then I heard a whisper. "I've come for my pot." Story 4. Greyhound's last flight. While working at the bar that evening, one of the customers really surprised me. Louis Farrell didn't drink alcohol. He never drank it. It was his ironclad rule. He had worked for over 30 years driving a shuttle bus. Louis drove inter-city flights and took passengers from one city to another. This evening. However, he was sitting at my counter with a troubled look and shaking hands. I poured him a double whiskey without a word. He drank it down, coughed, then whispered, "You know the Chicago-St. Louis route, don't you? That stretch through the Shawnee Forest? I worked this flight number 2417 yesterday." He pulled a crumpled ticket from his pants pocket. The flight number was clear. However, the date on the ticket looked like it had been erased. I thought it was a prank. Louis started to tell me. The bus was about a third full. The usual passengers, it was students, a couple of old people, workers going home after their shift, and a woman with a baby. We got through Bloomington and suddenly it's foggy, so thick that the headlights only illuminated 3 feet of road ahead of the bus. I slowed down to 20 miles. We should have been out of this fog in about a half hour, and by the time we did, we'd been traveling for almost 3 hours. GPS was glitching. Cell phones were down, and the passengers all of a sudden, they all stopped talking. When I turned around, Louis grabbed my wrist. His palm was cold, and he continued the story. They all looked at me, the same, without blinking, even a little kid looking me in the eye. And then the woman who was sitting in the window seat said, "You have to stop. They're waiting." At that moment, the bar became quiet. Even the eternal humming of the old refrigerator disappeared. Everything around them stopped and became quiet. Louis said, "I didn't stop. I drove my bus until it ran out of fuel, and when I got off," he pulled out his cell phone, showed me a picture. The picture was of an empty bus covered in a strange slime, as if it had been standing in a swamp for decades. However, the creepiest thing I saw was in the windows of the bus. Shadows. Dozens of shadows that pressed their faces against the bus windows from inside. I refilled Louis's glass and he continued. "I called the dispatcher and he told me that flight 2417 had been canceled, that my bus had been at the depot for 3 days. He leaned toward me and I saw fear in his eyes. This morning I found a ticket in the mailbox. This ticket." He again handed me the ticket he had shown me earlier. However, this ticket had a date written on it, and it was today's date. And on the ticket itself, in black letters, was written, "Seat 13, last stop." Story 5. The mirror behind the bar. Every bartender knows that the mirror behind the bar is more than just a decoration. It's needed to see customers without turning around. However, at our bar, Whisper Hollow, the mirror had its own specialty. When I got a job at this bar, I noticed it after about a week. Sometimes while working, I would accidentally turn my gaze to the mirror, and in those moments I could see extra people there, people who weren't in our bar at that moment. That woman in white I saw a few days before she showed up at the bar. It was just before closing time, and I was alone at the bar, yet I saw her in the mirror. I turned around, looked around the bar. I figured it was just my imagination. From fatigue, I saw the shadow of a man in a bowler hat flickering over Walter's shoulder. However, that was a long time before he told me his story. So, I just didn't pay much attention to my visions in the mirror. I chalked it up to fatigue. I put it down to the play of light, that the mirror was old and cracked at the corners, until one night it spoke to me. It was after closing time. I was alone, wiping glasses, counting the receipts. Suddenly I felt someone looking at me. I looked up. In the reflection of the mirror, right behind me, stood a stranger. Tall, in a black suit. I couldn't see his face, just a pale oval as if covered by a haze. I turned around. There was no one behind me. However, when I turned back to the mirror, he was still there. "Evan," he whispered, in my voice. I recoiled, knocking over the bottle. Whiskey spilled over the counter. Nothing spilled in the mirror at that moment. There, in the reflection, the bottle stood steady. After a few seconds, he started to reach out to me and said, "You must finish what you started." I grabbed the bottle that was on the bar and threw it at the mirror. I threw the bottle into the center of the mirror, but it didn't shatter. The mirror only cracked in one of the corners, but it didn't shatter. And he laughed. He laughed with my voice. And he said, "We're all here, and we're waiting for you." Since then, I try not to look in the mirror. Sometimes, though, when the bar is empty and the lights fade, I see them in it. Bill, in his truck, with a cap worn on his head. Walter, putting on his bowler. Louis, climbing into a bus with no license plate. And himself. Myself, standing among them. For more stories from the Bartender, subscribe to our channel. To be continued.